You ever wake up with a weight you can't quite name? It's not sadness exactly. It's not fear either. It's just this, hmm, a quiet tension humming under your skin, like your body's bracing for something, but nothing's actually wrong. The sun still rises, your coffee still warms your hands, but inside, you're already tired before the day even begins. And it's not because you've done anything yet. It's because of what your mind has already run through all before breakfast. The conversations that never finished. The decisions that never felt final. The questions that never found answers. And worst of all, the silence not around you but inside that somehow feels louder than noise. You try to shake it off. You tell yourself you're just overthinking, that you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too in your head. But deep down, there's this knowing, a quiet grief that maybe you're not just tired of life. You're tired of how you've been forced to live it, constantly solving, constantly analyzing, constantly trying to stay one step ahead of something you can't even name. Maybe it's the way you scroll, searching for meaning in people's curated moments, even as your own life blurs at the edges. Maybe it's how you keep rehearsing your words before you say them, not because you're unsure, but because you're afraid of being misunderstood. Or maybe it's just the silence at night when the noise fades and you're left with the echo of everything you've carried. It's subtle. That ache, that invisible pressure to figure everything out, to always have the right words, the right thoughts, the right plan. Like life handed you a test you never studied for, and now you're trying to memorize the answers as you go. But here's the truth no one says out loud, and maybe you felt it but never dared to admit it. You were never meant to carry all that knowing. You were never meant to figure it all out. And maybe that's why you're here, not because you're broken, but because you've been holding your breath in a world that tells you you're only safe if you understand everything. But what if that's the lie? What if your peace isn't waiting at the end of all your thinking? What if it's been here the whole time, waiting for you to stop running and just sit with yourself, even if you don't have the answers? So stay here with me just for a moment. Let that ache soften. Let your breath come back into your body. You're not wrong for feeling this way. You're not too much. You're just alive and tired, and maybe finally ready to come home to yourself. I remember a night not long ago when I lay in bed replaying a conversation I had earlier that day. It wasn't anything serious, just a few words over coffee. Nothing that would make the world pause, but my mind didn't let it go. Did I come off too harsh? Should I have smiled more? Did they walk away thinking I was cold or distant? Or worse, fake? I must have reimagined that moment 20 times, changing my tone, shifting my expression, rewriting my script like I was editing a movie I never even meant to star in. And all the while, my body just lay there exhausted from a day it had already lived once. And my spirit. It was somewhere far behind, waiting for me to stop spiraling, long enough to come back home. That night, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. It wasn't the world that was overwhelming me. It was me monitoring myself, studying myself, performing myself. Like peace could only be earned through constant self-correction. And that's the trap, isn't it? This belief that if we think hard enough, analyze long enough, prepare thoroughly enough, we'll finally feel safe. But real life, doesn't reward the most mentally prepared. It meets the most present. There's a difference. It's like standing in the middle of a foggy field. You keep squinting, trying to make out what's ahead. You analyze the shadows, measure the trees, anticipate the path. You tell yourself, once I figure it out, I'll move. But maybe you're not meant to wait for clarity before taking a step. Maybe clarity comes when you take the step anyway. I started noticing this in the smallest of things. Eating a meal without checking my phone. Sitting in silence without trying to make it productive. Letting an emotion pass without demanding it tell me what it means. It was uncomfortable at first. My mind didn't like it. It wanted to do something, solve something, name something. Because if I wasn't solving, I was failing, right? But then something shifted. I stopped reading into every pause in conversation. I stopped watching people's faces like emotional weather reports. I stopped decoding every sigh, every silence, every sideways glance. I let people be confused. I let myself be uncertain. I let the world be unfinished. And for once, I didn't rush to explain it. And in that space, in that deep, unsettling not knowing, I found something more valuable than certainty. I found breath. Not the kind that comes from inhaling and exhaling, but the kind that rises when your soul finally stops holding its stomach in. And that breath, it didn't bring answers. It brought something quieter. Presence. Because here's what I know now. You don't find peace by mastering your mind. You find it when you stop believing your mind has to master everything. So if you've been caught in that loop, trying to think your way into safety, trying to logic your way into worthiness, I want you to know it's not your fault. You were taught that understanding was control. But I promise you, some of the most beautiful things in life were never meant to be understood, only felt. So let the fog be fog. Let your heart beat without needing a reason. Let the moment hold you, even if it doesn't explain itself. Because maybe the lesson isn't in the clarity. Maybe the lesson is in your willingness to stay right here, even when there is none. There's a moment soft, almost imperceptible, when something inside you exhales before you even notice. A kind of internal loosening. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream breakthrough. But suddenly the noise is gone. Not because everything makes sense now, but because you've stopped demanding that it should. That's the kind of peace we forget we're allowed to feel. We've spent so long treating our minds like courtrooms, as if every thought needs to be put on trial. Every emotion needs to defend itself. Every silence needs a reason to exist. We became our own prosecutors, our own judges, asking life to give us answers before we allow ourselves to simply be. But what if we were never meant to interrogate our lives like that? What if stillness isn't a reward for solving the puzzle, but the space we return to when we realize there never was a puzzle in the first place? I used to think I had to earn rest. Now, I know I just had to stop running. I used to believe that clarity was power. Now I see presence as more powerful than any understanding. You don't need to decode every emotion before it passes. You don't need to know the reason behind every ache in your chest. Some things were never meant to be explained, only witnessed. And you were never meant to be a puzzle. You were meant to be felt, held, lived, even in your uncertainty. It's strange how life softens when you stop fighting it. How peace arrives, not when things finally line up, but when you stop twisting yourself into knots trying to make them. You start walking slower. You speak without overthinking every word. You listen not for threat, but for truth. You look in the mirror and stop asking, "Am I doing this right?" Instead, you ask, "Am I here?" And if you are, that's enough. That's more than enough. You stop chasing healing like it's some destination to reach. You stop performing your growth for others to applaud. You stop narrating your life like a story that has to inspire someone else. Because your life doesn't need to impress anyone to be meaningful. Not every moment needs to be shared. Not every realization needs to be articulated. Not every wound needs to be explained. Some things can just be sacred. Some things can just exist quietly, like you. That's the shift no one talks about. The moment when peace stops being a goal and becomes a home. You start to feel safe again, not because everything is certain, but because you're no longer abandoning yourself every time it's not. You don't have to edit your emotions mid-feeling. You don't have to narrate your worth in real time. You don't have to prove your healing in order to be whole. You are allowed to just be, even in the fog, even in the doubt, even when you have no idea what comes next. Especially then, because that's where presence begins, not when life is tidy, but when you stop needing it to be. That's where love grows, not when you feel lovable, but when you stop demanding proof. And that's where trust is born, not when you feel in control, but when you can finally whisper to yourself, even this is okay. So if you're here now, not because you have the answers, but because you're learning how to stay, I want you to know you're already enough. You're already whole. And even if no one sees the quiet work you're doing, even if no one claps, your soul does. And that's what matters. Let this moment be a soft place to land. Let it remind you that peace doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the absence of needing to know. Sometimes it's just a quiet breath. And the truth that for once you didn't run from yourself. There was a season in my life when everything felt like it was falling apart. I had just left a job that once gave me identity. Not because I was ready, but because something deep inside whispered, "You can't stay here anymore." I didn't have another role lined up. I didn't have a 5-year plan. I didn't even know who I was without a title next to my name. Friends would ask, "So what's next?" And I'd smile, lie softly, say I was exploring new things. But the truth, I was terrified. I'd sit at the edge of my bed some mornings, fully dressed, nowhere to go, just staring at the wall, hoping an answer would appear, hoping clarity would descend like a dove and whisper, "Here's what you're meant to do now." But nothing came. No sign. No voice. Only silence. And in that silence, I thought I was failing. Because I had been taught, like so many of us, that growth meant momentum. That healing meant progress. That peace meant being certain. And I had none of that. I just had space. Emptiness. Dazed tea. Until one afternoon, I remember walking through the park. It had rained that morning. Everything was still wet. The sky was still gray. And the world smelled like earth, like something had been washed clean. I sat down on a cold bench, frustrated with myself for not figuring it out yet, for still feeling lost. But then I looked up, and in that very moment, The clouds shifted just slightly. The light peeked through, and everything around me shimmered. Like the rain had left behind a kind of softness the sun couldn't create on its own. That's when it hit me. Maybe clarity doesn't come in answers. Maybe it arrives in presence. Maybe it doesn't look like direction, but like quiet. Maybe it doesn't feel like confidence, but like breath. And suddenly I wasn't lost anymore. I was just unhurried. And maybe that was okay. You see, no one teaches us how to stay in the unknown. We're taught to escape it, to outthink it, to analyze it into submission. But the unknown isn't the enemy. It's the space where life breathes. It's the fertile soil of your becoming. The place your soul grows, roots it never could when everything felt sure. And I know that sounds poetic, maybe even idealistic, but I've lived it. I've felt the raw panic of not knowing who I was anymore, and the quiet strength that rose when I stopped trying to label it. That's when I discovered you don't need to name the moment to belong in it. You don't need to be certain to be safe. You don't need to be understood to be real. Because sometimes your not knowing is holy. It's the doorway to something you've never let yourself feel. Like trust, not the kind that's built on facts, but the kind that's built on presence. Like surrender, not the collapse, but the rising from within. That says, I may not know what this means, but I know I won't leave myself while I'm in it. That's what peace truly is. Not the absence of chaos, but the decision to no longer abandon yourself when chaos arrives. And when you live from that place, you stop performing for clarity. You stop reaching for the next explanation. You start realizing that this messy, undefined in-between place is not the waiting room of your life. It is your life. And when you finally stop running from the fog, you discover it was never trying to swallow you. It was trying to hold you until you slowed down enough to feel the ground again. So if today feels unclear, incomplete, unresolved, take heart. That doesn't mean you failed. It might just mean you've arrived. So much of your life has been spent chasing something you were never meant to catch. You thought it was clarity. You thought it was control. You thought it was the moment when everything would finally make sense. But what you were really longing for was yourself. The version of you that doesn't need to have it all figured out. The one who isn't busy rewriting the past or forecasting the future. The one who doesn't wear stress like a badge of honor. The one who can sit in the middle of the mess and say, I'm here. And that's enough. And maybe that's all you ever needed. Not the answers. Not the plan, not the proof that you're doing life right, but the courage to stay, especially when it's messy, especially when it's uncertain, especially when every instinct tells you to retreat into your thoughts and start solving again. But you didn't, not this time. You stayed, and in doing so, you learned something sacred, that real safety doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from trusting softer. It comes from remembering that you are not a problem to be solved. You are a soul to be met again and again in each imperfect moment. So as you walk forward, from here, not with answers, but with presence, I hope you stop waiting for the next big realization. I hope you stop measuring your healing like it's a graph. I hope you stop reaching for a version of yourself that only exists in fantasy. Because the you who's here now, breathing, listening, feeling, is already enough. The peace you've been searching for isn't hiding behind some breakthrough. It's not waiting at the end of some perfect plan. It's here in the pause, in the stillness, in this breath. And if that breath feels shaky, if your chest is still a little tight, if your mind still wanders, that's okay. You're not doing it wrong. You're just human. And that's never been the problem. That's always been the miracle. So take this with you. This softness, this slowness, this quiet knowing that you don't need to perform your presence or justify your rest or explain your confusion. You only need to stay. That's all life has ever asked of you. And finally, you are.